Sparks Planning Commission meeting for Thursday night, July 19th to order. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Commissioner Bowles?
Here.
Commissioner Sperber?
Here.
Commissioner Sanders is absent. Commissioner Peterson? Here. Whoops, I'm sorry, guys. Commissioner Lee?
Here.
Commissioner Nowicki?
Here.
Commissioner Hewens?
Here.
Assistant City Attorney Doug Thornley?
Here.
City Planner Armando Ornelas.
Here.
Thank you. Item number 3, public comment. That's anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on any item either on or off the agenda for 3 minutes. Is there anyone who'd like to make a public comment? Thank you. Number 4, approval of the agenda. I will take a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve as
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. Item number 5, approval of the minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
I think I have 2 firsts and 1 second, so we'll let Janet figure that one out. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Announcements or committee reports? Amanda?
Mr. Chairman, we have none, but Mr. Rundle is going to provide you a couple of informational items.
That's the next item, but we'll move immediately to that. Rundle, speak. I don't know anyone else.
Jim Rundle, Senior Planner. Some of the regional planning commissioners may know that the Regional Planning Governing Board and the Regional Planning Commission have recently had some workshops regarding amendments to the regional plan. The 2012 regional plan update process is getting going, and of course by statute we have to have a new regional plan for 2012. One of the hot button items to the two city councils, Reno and Sparks, and it seems to be to the Regional Planning Commission, are TODs, Transit Oriented Development Corridors. So there has been direction to look at amending some of the TOD corridors for both Reno and Sparks. Based on that direction, the Sparks City Council recently directed staff to consider a phase 1, I'm going to call it, approach to amending the TOD corridor and looking at the area east of Sparks Boulevard, west of Vista, south of Prater, and north of I-80, that area within the TOD, and consider removing that area from the Sparks TOD corridor. So next Tuesday at the police department, Sparks will be having a neighborhood meeting regarding potentially remaster planning and rezoning all of the parcels in that general depiction I just gave you.
Could you go over again which that's the employment district? Or
if you look at the TOD, it's all zone TOD, but if you look at the TOD master plan and the TOD, what did we call it, the books, the manuals,
Right.
the design manuals, we had 4 sections.
Right.
We had like downtown and residential neighborhood and the marina district and that kind of thing. And one of the districts was we call it the employment district. Right. And you're more familiar with it from the Now Foods variants, that kind of thing.
Right.
But generally it's that area, that square. There are parcels on the east side of Vista, but generally it's that square there that we will be proposing to rezone and remaster plan. We're going to have the neighborhood meeting next week, and then Sparks Planning Commission will consider the proposal on the 2nd of August at your next meeting. Now on Monday's City Council meeting, on what would that be, the 23rd, staff will be proposing a regional plan amendment, asking the City Council to sponsor a regional plan amendment to regional planning. In the regional plan, there is a specific defined area of where the Sparks TOD corridor is. There's also one for Reno, and if both jurisdictions are considering amending where the TOD corridors are, we need to have that regional plan policy amended. Typically we would have brought that to the Planning Commission and had asked you to sponsor it to the council, and then we would have taken it from that. The reason that didn't occur this time was because regional planning had made a determination that we needed to amend the policy, and after our staff reports would have been due to you guys, so we were lucky enough to get it on a council agenda, and we will ask the council to make that request of regional planning. But that essentially will line up the August 2nd meeting of the master plan amendment and the rezoning for the planning commission.
Jim, at what time is the, at the police department?
It's at 6.
At 6?
And all the property owners within the area have been noticed, and all the property owners within 750 feet of the parcels have been noticed as well. And they've also been noticed of the August 2nd Planning Commission meeting, and essentially we did two notices within one, and it saves us quite a bit of money to do that.
So you're just going to consider that one area from Sparks to, what, McCarran?
It'll be from Sparks Boulevard to over to Vista, from Prater to 80.
Okay, just that one section.
Generally,
Crater then.
Yeah, generally that's where we're starting. The council wanted to get to bite that off first, and so we're going to do that. And ultimately, we will probably look at the entire TOD corridor. I think you'll hear a little bit about that later in the presentation today. But I wanted to inform you of the neighborhood meeting and the regional plan amendment request, the sponsorship of a regional plan amendment at the council meeting on Monday. And why you guys didn't get to see it. It wasn't to leave you out. It was just the way that the timing worked out when we got notified. And that staff report is very simple to the council, just requesting, and they know why. I mean, you guys at the regional planning commission level have heard quite a bit of discussion about this recently in the workshops. The last meeting, I guess you talked about it again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jim, I'd like to suggest, obviously at this point, we probably don't know what the complexity, if there is any complexity, of our agenda for the Thursday night meeting. Mm-hmm. But I would like to suggest that this is something that I think a number of us are interested in, that even if there's not enough to have a study session, that we ought to have a study session if devoted just to the Todd recommendations that you're going to be making on Thursday.
Okay.
I agree.
So essentially that's the 2nd. So on July 31st, you would like to have a study session that day, correct? That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else?
That's all.
Okay.
I have one more information.
And that is having to do with an item that you heard and took action on June 21st. And that was the handbook amendments for the Sparks Marina RV Park. That did move forward to City Council. The City Council, however, ended up in a 2-2 vote. And so essentially the item, the approval failed, if you will. And so I think where it stands now, the applicant is considering a resubmittal. The issue in particular that seemed to be, at least in terms of concern for those council members who voted against it, had to do with having a different standard, if you will, in terms of the RV park length of stay for this planned development handbook area versus what is in our city code. So I think we may come back to you in the form where, well, we'll see. It's up to the applicant to apply. I'm not going to speculate on, but I think you may very well see it again, and I just wanted to give you that update.
Thank you. Any other informational items or announcements?
Real quick, if I could, Chairman Voles, just to keep you updated on your next several meetings. You will be having a meeting on August 2nd, so in 2 weeks you will have another meeting. And then from what staff understands, we have quite a few applications that are slated to come in next Wednesday, which looking forward would make the September 6th meeting, and that looks like it may be a pretty good agenda for you. So just to keep you updated on those next couple of meetings.
So, Tim, just the one meeting in August? Right?
Just the one meeting in August, yes.
But we will have a study session even if the agenda doesn't really justify it, just for the Todd situation we talked about?
Certainly, we'll talk about that internally, and we can have a study session and agendize a workshop to specifically address or talk about the TOD issues. So we'll figure out the best way internally how to make that happen.
Thank you.
Great.
Oh, Tim, that meeting will be the 6th of September, right?
September 6th, I believe, yes.
The 2nd of September.
Thank you, Tim. Item number 8, PCN 12020 Alpha ASAR, if I'm saying that correctly.
Jim Rundle, Senior Planner, here to present the special use permit request from Alpha Azar. The Planning Commission has seen numerous master plan amendment and approval of policies over the years. Some of those were promoting reinvestment, adaptive reuse, diversification, and job creation. Alpha Azar is now requesting to utilize the site at 27 Briarley Way to do just that. The use, storage, and distribution of chemicals, while permitted by right under the Sparks Municipal Code, is governed in this case by the Nevada Revised Statutes. The statute requires 2 hearings, one at the Planning Commission and one at the Sparks City Council, or one at the City Council. So in this case, a special use permit, the Planning Commission will be forwarding a recommendation forward to the City Council. Staff believes that this proposal is in compliance with the city's master plan and supports city master plan policies. Staff also believes that the use is compatible with the surrounding properties, but did require some special consideration because of the location of the site being right across the street from a hotel use. The location of the site is highlighted here in the darker gray. This is Interstate 80. Just north of Interstate 80 is Briarley, and here you have the intersection of Briarley, Solomon Circle, and Vista Boulevard. Over here, the on-ramp for westbound Interstate 80. So while staff supports the use and believes it is compatible, we did determine it should receive special consideration regarding that hotel, as I had just said. And therefore, staff is proposing condition 6, which is that the applicant speak with the hotel use across the street and notify them of what's going on. Other than that, staff has similar conditions that the Planning Commission has seen before, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions for Jim?
I think we better wait till the applicant.
That's right.
Let them speak first.
If not, if the applicant available to speak, come on down.
Do you want
You can't sit there.
I was just thinking about if I need the, let's just.
I'm going to go.
Okay. Thanks. Good evening, Commissioners. You might want to. Good evening, Commissioners. John Krimpadik with KLS Planning, representing the applicant Alpha Azar.
Can you speak up just a little bit
Oh,
more?
sure, yes. The gentleman on my left is Michael Castagna. He's from the East Coast. He works with Alpha Azar extensively on the East Coast. Came for the hearing. He's here to address any concerns you guys might have about the safety, given the use that Jim explained. And he's very familiar with their operations. So otherwise, he will not do a presentation, but certainly would be glad to be part of it. So just a few comments. I wanted to touch on the operation because, it's nice to know who they are and what they do. We're not talking about a development project here. We're talking about a special use permit that is a different kind of a use permit. So Alpha Azar is an international company that has chosen this site in Sparks, Nevada, to be their primary distribution center to their client base, largely in California. They are a chemical company. They do shipping of small chemical vials that are already fully contained that will be in this site. And then their clients are like universities, pharmaceutical companies, research laboratories, most of which are in California, both Northern and Southern California. So obviously the business advantage here is to have chemicals that are manufactured in the UK and China, 90% of them, and then to their plant on the East Coast, just north of Boston, and then they reach out to their West Coast clients from Sparks, Nevada here. So from everything I've learned, they're a very, very clean, safe operation, very high-wage kind of an operation. They don't have a lot of employees in their first phase, but this is all very good stuff from an economic development point of view and also in terms of the planning. I think something that staff touched on was that, in the staff report that we have adaptive reuse of a site. I think that's really important, and given how tough our region has been hurt in the last 4 or 5 years and all the vacancies we have. So you've taken 110,000 square feet off the books in a very nice building, and of course the outside is completely as it is, very well landscape painted, parking, but then the inside will be completely redone, tailored to Alpha Azar's needs. The shipping amounts to, it's this simple, 2 UPS trucks a day, and it's very small boxes, 12 by 12 maximum box size, only by UPS. They don't do semi-truck type of delivery, and they set a maximum of a couple of trucks a day. So, and again, it's because it looks like jars the size of aspirin bottles. That's what we're dealing with. Staff makes the case for support and makes the findings. Certainly we agree. We've accepted all 6 conditions. The one condition that Jim pointed out was the one about meeting with the hotel. I think it's a very valid point that they brought up, because not knowing what it was and having a hotel directly across the street, asked us to meet with them. We met with the general manager today. That was because we was waiting for Mike to be here as he came from the East Coast. So the gentleman who's the GM was, I think, very favorable to what we had presented to him, talked about it. He brought up some very good questions, not concerns, and said he would write a letter saying they're okay with it. Obviously, I think the other compatibility issue is that it is distribution warehouse largely in the area now. I know it's the TOD. Jim talked about TOD on a bigger scale being looked and peeled back. This would be one of those locations. Certainly, it's primarily industrial in the area, distribution warehouse. This is a distribution warehouse type of a use, so I think it makes very good sense that way. Parking we looked at, we're only talking about 12 employees, very little visitor traffic, and 50 spaces on the site. So again, I think there's some good compatibility built in when you really drill down. And other than that, I think pretty much covers it. If Michael wants to, again, if you have any questions about the operation in more detail or the safety, please, I'd take whatever I can, and then Michael as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Questions for the applicant or John?
Mr. Chairman, I got a couple.
Sure.
John, you said that the only deliveries would be UPS and, what, twice a day in a certain package?
Yeah, a couple hundred boxes, small boxes per day.
And is
All
there,
UPS.
Will you have security there, Michael, in the building, or?
The building, or the main part of the building is completely surrounded by a security gate, cameras. There is full security inside the building as well as around the perimeter.
You know, I was going through your list of chemicals, and I was going through them, and one caught my eye. And I
Which one is that?
Sarin.
Which one?
Sarin. It's a nerve agent.
Interesting that you know about that. Sarin, S-A-R-I-N.
Right. It's
Okay.
a nerve agent that is very deadly. But then I started going through it, and you're not going to carry that here, correct?
It's not on the list.
Yeah. But I mean, not when everybody caught my eye, and I figured. You know. But anyway, that's all I have, Michael and John.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
So the stuff comes in on the UPS truck and then goes back out. Nothing's obviously made here, it's just stored here.
Right, 90% of the manufacturing, again, is international, is China, primarily UK, and then a small percentage on the East Coast near their headquarters in Massachusetts, just north of Boston.
And according to condition 5, I think it was, everything's stored inside, of course.
Yes, and a conditional as well, yeah.
Just I'm curious from a business perspective, I'm assuming that wherever the material is manufactured, it would be being delivered directly to the Reno Sparks area by freight or air or whatever way, as opposed to going to Boston and then coming here?
If it's coming from China, it would come directly here. If it was coming from the UK, it would go via the Boston plant and then here.
By what method?
Truck.
UPS or?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
So it'll fly in, come to the UPS distribution, and then to this or not?
Depending on the quantities, if it's a small quantity, it can be air freighted, but for the most part, it's all ground.
It's okay.
Yes.
UPS. Great. And I want to go through essentially, so we see John email to you giving what chemicals.
Right,
And-
the email I
and-
sent to staff.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, we have a condition that's saying, these are the chemicals, and it says that you have a maximum of 20% of these numbers. Maybe somebody can explain that to me?
Okay, the Ward Hill, and I pointed
Right.
this out too. Ward Hill is their headquarters in Massachusetts,
Right.
right? Fully developed site, bigger facility.
Exactly.
So when I talked to the general manager, who is Deb Grocott with Alpha Azar, she said there will be, you're referring to the memo.
Yes, exactly.
20% of those maximum levels at the Sparks location for the first 1 to 5 years. The 1 to 5 years, of course, is vague because they have intent to grow, but don't know how much they're going to grow and how fast. So just putting it out there that they will definitely grow, have intent to grow, but they'll only be 20% of those maximum levels when they start out.
Okay, and the way I read this condition, these are the only things that would be approved in this, are the chemicals that would be approved?
That's right,
And-
because it's the NRS list of potentially hazardous chemicals at a certain quantity level. And so once you kick in that threshold, have the chemical at a certain quantity, then they need to disclose it's on that list, yes or no, and that's why we had the
And
the,
that's where
list.
that's where I see, and then it talks percentages such as some
Percentage.
of them 135%, but in this case, you'd be less than that in this material?
No, they're
I'm
saying...
having trouble with these.
That
with these
table?
columns. Yeah,
Okay.
so help
Okay,
me.
so you look at the amount that they have in Ward Hill, right, on the
Yes.
135, so we're looking at page, actually, it's not, it's the
Item 49.
Yeah.
Yeah,
item 49 thing.
right, let's say
So
49.
they have 100 pounds of that particular chemical at Ward Hill.
That they
In the case
store
of
there.
Sparks, they're saying they're going to have 135 pounds, therefore 135%
Of that,
Yeah.
okay.
of that one chemical.
Oh, let's go back then, because I'm confused.
Okay.
I thought
Sorry.
in that example that there was 135 pounds of that particular item in Ward Hill, and they're saying that it would never be more than, or it's not likely to be more than 25% of what is at Ward Hill to be used, stored here. So 25% of 135 is what would be stored here, if I read that correctly.
That's what I said in the initial operation.
That's-
But the maximum they would have is that amount shown there,
But-
the 135.
Again, let's go
But
back
referring to the memo,
the memo
it
says
says
that they will be
20%
at
of the Ward Hill
20%.
levels as an approximation for the first
First
1 to
5
5 years.
Yes.
Right.
So these numbers that are listed here for Ward Hill, which for the most part are way below the hazardous
exactly
standards in the state.
That's what-
But we would only be dealing with 25% of that number in the beginning stages.
You're right.
Is that correct?
You wanna-
That is correct.
Yeah.
Commissioner Sperber,
Yes.
the intent of the condition
Right.
was that in 5 years, if there's a successful operation, the applicant doesn't have to come back and amend the special use permit. And
Okay.
because of the state statute having to do with planning commission and city council, we said come up with what you ultimately might do there if you're operating at the best
Right.
that you'd ever operated at. So we've asked them to be a little ambitious on that list so that we could hopefully get those concerns ironed out today and not have to come back in 4 years and have the applicant wait 120 days to go through the process when they want to add 5 pounds of something.
Right.
And you understood that.
Right, and so that's why we have this list sitting here,
Yes.
and this will become a requirement.
Yes.
Will, where you intend
That's
per
what we're
this thing to be.
proposing, yeah.
The proposal to put this as a, okay.
Can I ask a question about the items that are listed as zero, listed as not being used here? If we approve this tonight, would the company be able to add the lists that are currently, that are on this as zero without any one's approval? Are we really approving anything on this list going forward?
If it says zero, that they don't intend to have it there.
I understand that they don't intend to.
Then
but-
they should not have those chemicals at the site by the special use permit. If it's approved,
For these specific ones that we're
So
talking.
if they decided in the future as a business proposal that they wanted to add some of these others that are currently at zero, they would
Have
come
to
back
amend
with
the
an
special-
additional, amend the special use permit. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right, so I'm understanding that. I guess the second thing I take from this list is, and I'm looking at this thing and, I see letters from Health, but the letters that I'm looking for Washoe County Health is not looking at the hazard. That's right, that letter has nothing, that has to do with non-items here. Who actually reviews that?
At the district health?
Or anyone?
Well, there were, in the NRS statute that,
Right, help me a little with
it's
the.
278, 147. There's a list of folks, there's a list of agencies that we had to contact regarding this item, and we forwarded the applications to the people in that list. Some of them were like the Department of Industrial Affairs for the state of Nevada, but more importantly and more appropriately was the fire marshal, state fire marshal.
Right.
And the state fire marshal has said that they turn over their authority to the city's fire marshal, Bob King, to review the site for compliance with the state's requirements.
And it was turned over to him, Jim?
Yes.
Okay, so let's follow from there. When would that approval be given? We're voting here for.
Yes. So
Right.
let's play this out. The
Yeah.
application would go forward to city council, and they would, let's
Agree
assume an
with this.
approval.
We'll-
The applicant's required to get a business license. The business license would come into the city and be forwarded to different agencies. Planning and zoning is one of them. One of the others is fire. Fire has a team of inspectors that go out and would inspect the site for what standards they need based on what the business license application says they want to do out there. And that's where it would get reviewed for all of those fire codes and I don't know if I want to call them chemical codes, but what the state fire marshal's office would be looking for.
All right, I feel more comfortable there. I was wondering if, who was reviewing that.
Yeah, prior to a certificate of occupancy, they would have to meet some certain, any building does, anybody who requests a business license has to meet certain standards. And the different divisions of the city inspect those buildings for that.
Well, go ahead.
Is it, no, I was just interested that they assign Fire Marshal Bob to be the state. Does that happen all the time, or is that something new?
I don't know how often it happens because we don't do conditional use permits for hazardous chemicals very often.
Right.
It's been
It's-
probably
I know.
I can't remember the last time. It's not very often, and then, as the planning commission knows, we don't forward special use permits to city council very often anymore, so.
Right.
Right.
I don't know how often the state fire marshal turns over their authority to the city's fire marshal.
Yeah, I don't ever remember.
Jim, we a couple of years ago approved the storage and distribution of gas on Glendale or Grail?
Yeah.
Glendale.
Answer man.
Yeah. Did we go through the same process then? I was just curious.
I don't know.
Which project was that?
I can't think of the name of the company, but I know that they were going to store
You know,
Or air gas or something?
Air gas, I think it was.
Oh, air gas, I did that one. We didn't go through the same process. It was a special use permit.
There was a, prior to the 2008 industrial zoning code update that the Planning Commission might remember doing. We rezoned a significant portion of the industrial area. We had the workshops, and we also did we revised the code significantly. I think the staff report was about an inch thick based on all the standards we changed. And in that, we changed the standard requiring a special use permit for what staff called outdoor processing. And when you wanted to, say, have a propane tank and sell propane outside, we called it outdoor processing. And we would require a special use permit based on the code. That code's been changed now. It no longer requires an entitlement. Back in that set of zoning changes and code changes, we dropped special use permits by 80%. We created a section called use standards. So we put all those uses that used to require special use permits and said, if you're going to do this, you got to do these 5 things. Because in the research we did, we found out we were conditioning the use with the same 5 conditions time after time, determined it's not special. At that time, Commissioner Bowles, I would speculate that air gas was deemed outdoor processing by staff and required a standard special use permit, and probably did not trigger the NRS reference of these certain chemicals require a conditional use permit.
That's probably because these are hazardous.
Yeah.
Although that was the psychological issue that night as well. Was
Sure.
What sorts of risks are we taking on for the public?
Sure. And that's why certain things require special use.
But again, at the C of O time is when the review of whether these hazardous materials are acceptable to somebody technical and on chemicals, that's when the review will be done at that?
The first review. And then they're also done yearly. You have to reapply for your business license once a year. I couldn't tell you exactly how the fire department conducts their inspections of each site, but I know they go out to each site. And we also have environmental control. They have to sign off on certain permits, and they're going to be inspecting the site too.
Right. And like you were saying, the fire has seen this list now and then talked, like you say, back and forth with the state fire marshal, so there's
Yes.
some review of this at
Yeah,
that
we've
point
had,
already?
I think, 2 significant pre-application meetings.
Okay.
And in those pre-application meetings, the fire department was there. Well, you can see you have the last page of your staff report is the letter from the state fire marshal's office.
Right.
But yes, we had 2 pre-application meetings that I'm
Okay.
aware of, and the fire marshal, Sparks' fire marshal, was in
Great.
attendance at that meeting and worked with Alpha Azar to let them know what they'd be looking at, what they needed to provide for a safe building.
Jim reminded me in the pre-app meeting, we had Mike and his full team from, again, the East Coast guys, did a presentation, a lot more technical detail to
Right.
the technical people on staff, including
The building official was in as well.
official, I believe John Martini was there. And,
It was a little outside the jurisdiction of the planning guy.
Yeah.
I know it is, but, you know,
All that is based on national standards and quantities. So some of these may not, even though they have a quantity of 100 pounds or 200 pounds, it may not meet the national requirement to be placard and all that kind of stuff. So the fire department has those guidelines along with their,
Okay.
and they have a hazardous triad team here as well that's well-versed in chemicals and what they do and whatnot. So I'm sure that their presentation before that was in detail is giving them a good idea of what's going to be there and how it's going to be handled. And it sounds like all this stuff is already prepackaged and it's not going to be necessarily in bulk bins or bags, so.
Is that correct?
yes. Can we show you a bottle? He brought one down.
Absolutely.
That's typical thing.
I like that, you're coming from the Renza guy. Thank you.
That's something 35 years ago.
Go ahead and explain it if you would.
These are typical sizes for their bulk storage. And some are sold outright in these in these vials or bottles, and some are repackaged into smaller or larger quantities depending on the order. But for the most part, these are the types of things that are on the shelving in each of the classification rooms for the different products that they handle. I'll just give you a couple of minutes.
This must be valuable because it's empty.
But it would just look at. Right, so in some cases, you might have to split up and make a partial.
Correct.
A lot. And that's the only thing that you're doing besides mostly
Moving over.
removing in and out of
That's
these
correct.
products.
Okay. Are there other questions for the applicant?
Yeah, I do. If you, back again with, and it kind of bothered me, the meeting with the hotel, and all of a sudden we get a meeting at the end here with the hotel and saying, you know, this is unusual because, you know, notifying a hotel, and I can just imagine the general manager obviously wouldn't know any more than any of us probably what chemicals we're talking. So maybe a little more discussion on that whole subject and how that meeting.
On how the meeting went?
Yeah,
Well, it actually started with telling them about why a special use, or in this case, conditional use permit is required, right?
Right.
And it's because of those thresholds on the NRS list of chemicals. And so I told them we do all kind of impact analysis. We actually did a traffic letter, trip
Right.
generation letter, discussed parking, and then said the thing that was more concerning to staff, and we agreed to with it, was because the use is a hotel being close to this chemical storage. So we gave it a little extra consideration. So Michael explained the operation and the safety in great detail with the floor plan and all of the different chemical bins. If you want to get into it, by all means, go ahead. And the gentleman I thought he brought up a very good question, which was, do I have to do anything to adjust my operation because you're coming in?
Right.
Like, are there any odors? No. Are there anything where I need to take extra precautions or noticing? There's none of that. It's just,
Right.
as he will know it, it's going to be UPS trucks and employees coming and going with delivering boxes.
And my,
And he did seem very comfortable, and he did, but I guess we'll see when we get the letter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
am I right on my geography? I'm not sure if it's still there, but I'm thinking that there was a distribution facility next door or very close from Pfizer. Is that correct?
This was the old Caterpillar building. Does that?
No, but I think one or two buildings down
Yes.
towards is a Pfizer distribution facility, which probably has similar issues.
They'll be able to walk across the street and get their orders. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Was that enough explanation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions for the applicant?
And I'd just like to make a comment, Mr. Chairman. I'll probably vote yes on this action, but I like to say anytime a new employer comes to town that hires new employees for the city of Sparks, I'll back you 100%.
That's great.
And we really appreciate you coming out here.
Will you be hiring employees?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There'll be probably 2 managers coming from Massachusetts that will run the facility, but everybody else is probably going to be hired local. Some of the technical aspects of the chemical distribution center, they'll be sent back to Massachusetts for probably 3 months of training, and then put on the site. And initially, we'll probably have, like John said, about 12 people, and then it'll grow from there.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing item. Is there any member of the public that would like to come forward and speak for up to 3 minutes on this topic? Oh, you're taking all that valuable stuff back, huh?
I'll leave it with
It's
you
all-
if you want it.
All right, we'll bring it back to the planning commission.
I have just one more question for Jim.
Fine.
So because this special use permit, we're just a forwarding body to the council, if they did make a change in any of these chemicals or they wanted something else, would the same procedure, if they wanted to amend the special use permit, come to us and then go to the council?
Yes.
Just curious.
Yeah, because it says substantial changes to the thing, whatever that term is.
Well, that
So what's your
is,
condition?
that's our standard condition that you see on all of those. And that's where staff gets to decide whether something's
When it
substantial.
is substantial.
This is a little bit different
I know.
because it's a specific chemical list and certain quantities are listed. So they have to be pretty close to those. We're not going to be
Right.
making percentages. If they add a list, if they want to add a chemical that's not on the list, I would say they have to amend the special use permit.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff? If not, would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion.
All right.
I move to approve the special use permit requested, oh, well, we're going to forward this on though, right? So,
you could change the motion.
yeah,
The
so
motion's a little different than it
I
does.
move to forward a recommendation of approval to the city council for the special use permit requested associated with PCN 12020, based on findings S1 through S6, and the facts supporting these findings as set forth in the staff report.
Second.
Is that right?
Commissioner Peterson, I also forgot to add in the conditions 1 through 6.
Oh. And then I'd like to amend my motion to add the conditions 1 through 6 as
Thank you.
listed in the staff report.
We have a first and a second and a first and a second.
The attorney like that?
Are we okay?
Thank you very much. Any discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thanks and good luck with it.
Thank you, Gus. It's interesting going through that.
We're moving on to general business items. Item number 9, Lennar Reno LLC. Tim Thompson, I'm assuming.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tim Thompson, Senior Planner, again for the record. This is a rather unusual request in that the DeAndrea Plant Development Handbook has a special condition that essentially states side yard setbacks can be reduced to 5 feet with 15 feet between structures if approved by the Design Control Committee, the Planning Commission, and City Council, provided that there is a variety of approved architectural styles within the subdivision. Typically, staff would have addressed this situation when the tentative map came through the process. However, the tentative map for DeAndrea Phase 3 was processed back in 2003, 2004. And, here we are, 2012. We've got a developer that is looking to adjust the product. They're building, it sounds like they're doing relatively well up there. And to try and maintain their sales and what they've been able to accomplish up there, they've come forward and asked to implement this special setback condition. Typically, it's a 7.5-foot minimum setback with 20 feet between structures. So, really what we're talking here is 2.5 feet. It is staff's opinion that they do provide substantial variation in architecture. The applicant is here. Their representative is here to answer any questions you may have regarding the architecture, and they're prepared to demonstrate to you that they believe that they do in fact meet that requirement. They are proposing 5 different floor plans. There are 3 different elevation types. So there alone you have 15 different housing types, floor plans and styles. And then when you throw in, 5 different color palettes, it just expands the number of homes. So the chances of any one home repeating is very slim in this case. I will point out that the floor plans and the elevations that are being discussed tonight have been previously approved by the Planning Commission for other villages, and the developer is seeking to use those floor plans and those approved elevations in these additional villages. What we're specifically talking about tonight is Carrera. That is where they're asking for this setback reduction. The reduction would only apply to a certain number of lots, not the entire subdivision. They've gone through and done an analysis, and they've determined that it's only a certain number of lots that would be required. Would just assume grant it for the entire village, just in case that number fluctuates. But they've gone through the trouble of identifying which lots they believe they would have to use this particular condition on, this special condition on. So based on that, staff is asking that you go ahead and forward a recommendation of approval onto the City Council, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Tim?
On the map that was provided, the darker shaded lots are the lots that are in question, I'm assuming? Or am I wrong?
No, I was trying to read that too.
I think what we were showing was this map is just Carrera, just for reference. The different colored, the grayscale, they appear to be it has to do with the type of grading and the split level.
Right.
Maybe we can get that question answered.
So,
go ahead, state your name and who you're with, please, and
Sean Richardson with Jeffrey Demir and Associates. We're the architects and on the site. I was just going to reinforce what Tim said. Those shaded lots are in fact lots that will be designed as walkout units. They have some topography to them. Okay. So those will be new units at a future time that will come in with a separate application for them.
Cool. The term walkout.
Walkout.
Yeah.
So when you're at the street, it'll appear to be either a single or two-story home, but because the topography goes down away from the street, you'll actually have a basement level, but it'll have glass on it, so you'll have views and be able to walk out from that lower level.
So back to the question then.
Right.
So are we approving the change in the setbacks for this entire, so the white and the gray has no meaning in terms of what we're doing?
correct.
Correct.
Okay, so again, and I know when I started, we talked about the setback. The actual setback goes from the actual structure and does not include any, let's say if there is a fireplace or something sticking out, that still could be within that 5-foot section.
Is that correct? I believe it is.
There,
Architectural projections can go within that.
yeah, there are some allowances in the handbook that do provide for a certain amount of
And that's-
area that extends into the setback.
That's in some of those cases, and I thought that's true in there. You've seen houses where you can get, if you get, it's only 2.5 feet you're asking for here, but in some cases, you're starting, if you have like too much of an out on that thing, a guy can't pull his garbage can out, he can't cut his lawn, if they're too much.
Right.
Is there ways to actually maybe reduce that problem on those specifics?
Well, let me refresh my memory very quickly. I don't think
Okay.
we have any pop-outs on these, so let me
That's-
just take a quick run through. I think we actually designed these to where any of those elements are built into the plan as opposed to popping out of the plan.
Yeah, I think Sean is correct, and let me go ahead and just read this.
Yeah, what does it say?
Cornices, canopies, eaves, chimneys, or other similar architectural features may extend a maximum of 2.5 feet into a required front, rear, and 10-foot side yard setbacks, and are not to exceed 10% of facade with architectural feature.
Great, so we don't have those problems. You've
And we-
seen those houses in the past with
And we
5
have-
foot, and then they put the out, and you really can't get, and you're
Right.
saying, I can't believe somebody did that.
Yeah, and we have no projections on these, so they'd be the clear width all the way down.
Terrific. I like that.
Any other questions for the applicant or Tim? Thank you. If there are no other questions, I'm willing to accept the motion. Not on, this is not a public, this is general business item.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion. I move to forward a recommendation of approval to the City Council to allow for the reduction of the side yard setbacks for the Carrera subdivision within Phase 3 of the DeAndre Plan Development PCN 03080, pursuant to the requirements included in the DeAndre Plan Development Handbook.
Second?
I have a motion and a second for the suggested motion. Any discussion on that? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to ask you, and I'll take the chairman's liberty just for a second, what the impact has been, if there has been any so far, on your plans with the troubles of the golf community, golf course. Can I do that, Mr. Attorney?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Come tell us. Yeah.
If not, I can wait till the comments from the
It'd be
commissioner.
great.
But thank you very much.
Come on. Come visit us.
No decision-making.
No decision.
I don't have to say my name, right?
Sure. And smile because you're on camera.
No, I'm Dustin Barker. I'm with Lennar Homes.
Right.
It's unfortunate about the golf course, obviously. So far, to answer your direct question, we've continued to sell homes and close homes up at DeAndrea.
Right.
Last month we sold 6 homes, and I think so far this month we've sold 1.
Great.
So far we haven't seen a direct impact from a number standpoint, but it's tough to say what the future impact will be. I mean, obviously the golf course was a good amenity, and it's something that we enjoyed to have our homes be up against. But we're continuing to build homes and to sell homes at this point. So until we face a challenge, then we'll address it at that point.
Okay.
Unfortunate, though. I thought it was a great amenity.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you, Doug.
Thanks.
I intended to ask that as part of the presentation. I forgot.
Look at Doug's right. Move on, boys.
Item number 10. Jim.
Jim Rundle, Senior Planner, here with Angela Foos from CFA. Commissioner Sanders isn't here tonight, but I want to back up a little bit and tell you why we're here tonight. The City Council, a few months back, approved some money for staff to hire an outside consultant and analyze the City of Sparks Title 20 or zoning code. Commissioner Sanders participated. I think that you guys selected her at one of your meetings to be part of a team to select a team to come in and analyze the zoning code. Clarion was hired out of Colorado in conjunction with CFA locally. Most of the planning commissioners attended some stakeholder meetings where we had developers and property owners and brokers and realtors and a variety of stakeholders, or attempted to have a variety of stakeholders, attend a meeting where they essentially got to say what issues they found troubling in the municipal code of Sparks, or where they've worked in other areas and found it to be successful and let us know maybe we should consider implementing those strategies in our code. We conducted those, I think, in one day, but it was a long day. They started early in the morning and concluded after 5 o'clock that afternoon. From those meetings and from the analysis of the codes, including the sign ordinance, the TOD, the design standards manual, Clarion and CFA have created a presentation of what they believe we should consider if we move forward with phase 3 of amending the Title 20. This is Clarion and CFA's presentation. Staff has reviewed it, but it is their proposal to the City of Sparks. So I'll turn it over to Angela, and if you have questions, they'll probably go this way. I'm going to go sit by Doug.
Look at that. Doug is excited.
I'll go sit by Doug. Oh.
Thank you. As Jim said, my name is Angela Foos, and I'm with CFA. Clarion was the lead consultant on this project, and I served as the local planner, really in a secondary capacity. There we go. We held, as Jim mentioned, probably 6 or 7 different stakeholder interview meetings, and out of that came probably 5 or 6 overall themes of changes or things that people had concerns about or what wasn't working as part of the code. The first kind of overriding theme had to do with the general belief that the TOD is not working and that it's actually inhibiting development in Sparks. Some people feel that the TOD boundaries are too broad. They go from El Rancho all the way to Vista Boulevard. Others commented that the TOD standards are just too ambitious. They felt that the standards related to parking location and building orientation, building setbacks, requirements for having to have mixed use in certain areas, and some of the minimum density requirements were just too much. Keep in mind, while many of these comments were expressed, it should be noted that a lot of them were actually anecdotal comments and had reference more to the City of Reno's TOD standards and not the City of Sparks' TOD standards. So take it for what it's worth. There are a lot of standards in place that are really tailored for many of the standards related to the major activity centers and not to the overall TOD area. So it's not the entire TOD that is falling under these standards that are of concern. The TOD manual does offer a variety of development incentives and optional menus for selecting different design standards. And that was one thing that was, it's a positive thing, and that's a good thing that you guys are doing. So there's short-term and long-term recommendations. The short-term recommendation that first came forward is one that you guys are already doing, and that is taking the portion of the TOD from Sparks Boulevard to Vista Boulevard out of the TOD. This is part of the employment area. It's really an industrial area. It was never suited for this type of TOD development. Other short-term options are to use the minor deviation as part of the TOD development process. Minor deviation allows for a 10% reduction. It's just a staff approval. It does not require a special use permit. It does not require planning commission or city council approval. It's already in the code, so it should be implemented as part of the TOD code.
10% of what?
So this could be used for parking, for instance. If you're required to have 30 parking spaces, you can deviate by 10% or 3 spaces. It could also be used for landscaping or setback requirements. The other option for short-term ideas was to supplement the development guide with additional material. And this would help to emphasize that there are incentives and there's a lot of flexibility for developing within the TOD boundaries. The fourth recommendation was that it should be noted that further evaluation is needed to be sure that these changes aren't going to lessen the effectiveness of the TOD standards. We also have mid to long-term recommendations, and this is on the slide in front of you. One of the things that we recommend is that we reduce some of the minimum density requirements. One of the concerns that we've heard is that it's too hard to meet these floor area ratios and minimum density requirements. Keep in mind that the current minimum densities are already lower than what the regional plan recommends. Next, we suggest requiring greater flexibility in the minimum mix of uses on larger parcels. In some of these activity centers, you have to have both residential and non-residential or different types of mixed uses. So if we had greater flexibility, that might provide for fewer barriers to development. And third, we suggest reducing the build-to zone. This is basically a standard that requires a certain percentage of the street frontage be occupied by building wall. And this is to help create a more pedestrian-oriented environment. So if you reduce this standard, it's basically allowing for more flexibility and creativity in the design of your site. We suggest that you consider adding additional adjustments to the TOD boundary, and so that's outside of what you're already taking out. This could be removing potentially certain parcels or entire areas from the TOD. And finally, it's recommended that the city revisit some of your existing policies. There's a lot of grandfathered buildings that have been in place for a long time, and they were built when it was more of an auto-oriented type of use, and it doesn't really fit with the TOD uses or the TOD standards. So it makes it really tough to redevelop some of these sites.
When you say auto-oriented, in the sense that there's a large parking area and people drive to it.
Correct. Correct. The next overriding theme was that there seems to be a general perception that the code acts as a barrier and that it does not allow for flexibility in creativity and design. We found that the code actually does allow for flexibility, and you have a couple tools that allow that. One is the minor deviation, and again, that's the 10%. We found that a lot of the developers aren't using this, and I'm not sure if it's I think it's more of an issue of they don't realize they have the ability to ask for a 10% reduction. Sometimes they need more than 10%, so it's not going to be effective. But it is a tool that you already have, and maybe we just need to be more aware of it. You also use plan development handbooks, and this is great if you want to create your own zoning and your own design standards. I think Sparks has, 44 different plan development handbooks. So there's issues within that in itself. But that's a tool that people are currently using. And the third option that you have is the variance application. So this only works if you can prove that there's a hardship, which is hard to do. Sparks doesn't use the variance process very often. So in terms of what we recommend for the short term, I would suggest that you allow for maybe a major deviation through a special use or some other kind of permit process. So this would be for deviations greater than 10%. Here's an example of what some of the other communities are utilizing just for your 10% minor deviation, and you guys can expand on that. Another option is to consider what we called an alternative equivalent compliance process. And this is for projects that really meet the intent of the code but aren't meeting the code. So this would allow you to go through maybe a different approval process because you can't really qualify it as a special use permit, it doesn't really qualify as a variance. It's basically another process that gets you to doing something that allows for more flexibility and, again, still meeting the intent of what the code's supposed to be. This works best for more design-oriented standards such as like parking, landscaping, orientation, those sorts of things. You may also want to consider requiring what we call more of a public benefits, so that if you can't meet the standards, you can do something that benefits the public, such as allowing for more open space. So again, sometimes you see this in handbooks, but it's not in the code. The third overarching theme that we heard was that we need to streamline the code procedures. And this would allow for reducing some of the uncertainty we heard and improving efficiency within the code. One of the concerns we heard from the development community was that we want some certainty that our project's going to be approved. And it's tough for out-of-town developers to come into town not knowing, and so they invest a lot of time and a lot of money and resources to go before a planning commission and a city council, and that's a big risk. So if there was more certainty, maybe there would be more incentive to develop in Sparks. Short-term options for getting around this may be to reduce some of the discretionary review. And keep in mind, discretionary review is what's required to go to planning commission or city council. So this would allow staff to have more discretion over projects. This would also enable projects to go straight to building permit. So this would get rid of that probably 3 to 6 month timeline where they have to prepare preliminary plans, go to a planning commission or city council, and then submit to building permit. You can also change the length of certain procedures. Right now, on entitlements, there's a 21-day appeal period. So that's about a 3-week, well, it is a 3-week timeline. This could be reduced to just 10 days. That's typical in a lot of other jurisdictions. You could also extend the permit approvals on timelines. Right now, you have, in your special use permits, you have 1 year before the permit expires. A lot of projects are getting permitted but not developing within that 1 year, so their permit's expiring. We're suggesting that you extend that timeline to maybe 2 or 3 years. Other suggestions for maybe more the mid to long-term time frame would be to simplify the amendment process for plan development handbooks. We're seeing a lot of these PD handbooks come back for amendments because the economy's changed and the needs have changed. It's still a very long process to amend a handbook. So there may need to be a policy in place that says if you're doing a minor amendment, you go this route. If you're doing a major amendment, you go this route. And the minor amendment process is shorter. So that really needs to be solidified and put into code. And as we previously mentioned, you could also reduce the amount of discretionary review. So again, this is changing projects that normally would require a special use permit to now being staff review and going straight to building permit. Other communities have also done what we call call-up procedures, and this allows City Council to have oversight of some of these administrative decisions. So if it's something that staff can't work out, it would go to City Council for review. Again, kind of circumventing the Planning Commission, but speeding up the process. You can also take a look at the existing application checklist. This is for site plan review, zone changes, special use permit, variance, and really look at those and say, are all these submittal requirements really required? When somebody comes in for a special use permit, they don't always need a grading permit, a utility plan, geotech report, traffic study. There's a lot that goes into that, and that's expensive and it's timely. So you may want to take a look at those checklists and see if some things can be eliminated. Clarion also took a look at the potential opportunities to improve the formatting, the organization, and the overall clarity of the code. The Sparks code is an older, outdated code. So they've come up with some short-term and some long-term suggestions. Number one is that you really need to revamp the use classification system and put it into more of a table format. You currently have basically different sections of the code and different paragraphs explaining what the uses are permitted in the different zoning districts. If you put it into a table, and you already have this in your TOD code, but you don't have it in your regular code, it makes it very easy to go to a particular use and see in which different zoning districts it's allowed outright, it's allowed by special use permit, or allowed by site plan review. You can also include areas for defining the different land uses. Definitions were something that got brought up a lot during the stakeholder meetings and just in different discussions. Because it's an older code, it doesn't have all the definitions of today's uses. So that's something to consider short term. And then in the mid to long term options, you might want to look at improving the use classification system. Again, kind of ties into with what we were just talking about with finding definitions that fit with today's standards, putting it into more of a table format. It's just something that's going to take a while to do. So part of it you could do short term, but part of it you're going to need a more in-depth analysis to figure out what you want and how you want to do that. You may want to also look at some of your city policies related to the industrial area. The majority of your industrial area is near the Truckee River and it's in a flood zone. So there's some potential problems with redeveloping in a flood zone. So maybe you want to look at, is this really an appropriate area for where you want your industrial development, or is it more appropriate for maybe outdoor recreation type uses? Because a lot of those buildings are older, they also don't meet code in relation to parking. So that's been a problem when certain users leave. We're hearing from the brokerage community that it's hard to find new users because there's not enough parking. So again, because it's an older area, it's more of a policy issue that you as a city are going to have to look at and analyze and figure out what you want to do with this area. And then finally, just more of an overall organization and format. One thing you can do is consolidate all the different documents that you have. You have Title 20, which is your zoning, Title 17, which is your subdivision. Then you have your TOD standards, which is, at least 1.5 inches thick. And you have your design standards manual. So you can consolidate all of that into one unified code. You can also put together more of a graphic that shows the review process and it kind of better outlines the process for different types of applications. For instance, if you had a special use permit, it would show, these are the dates, not specific dates, but here's the process. It goes here first and then on to Planning Commission. If it's appealed, it would go to City Council. So that can be documented in a graphic form, and that's very easy for people to understand. That's used all over in other communities. It's pretty simple. Then there's other things you can do to reformat your code. And here's just an example of something that a firm, I think it's in Virginia, where they're updating their zoning code. It's just easier to read. You can add pictures. You can put in dynamic headers. You can use flow charts. You can have illustrations with captions. Pictures are a great way to show what you're trying to show in words. And then you can also put in tables. Again, a lot of people have a hard time when they open a manual and it's all paragraphs. It's a lot to take in. But if there's pictures and tables and graphs, it's much easier to understand. A lot of communities also have adopted what they call a separate user's guide, and this is just a separate document that helps to explain the general purpose and the organization of the development code. So this chart is basically a summary of what we just talked about. Again, we have probably 5 or 6 different categories of overarching themes that we've heard. We have short-term recommendations, and we also have the mid to long-term recommendations. So after tonight, we'll take your comments and your questions, and then this project will be forwarded to the City Council. And Clarion will be making a presentation to City Council on Monday, and then after that, we will change, if we need to, the recommendations. We'll update the report that was written. It's about a 38-page document that pretty much summarizes everything that I just talked about, and then we'll move forward with what staff wants to do. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Questions? So essentially, make it easier to read.
Mm-hmm.
Streamline it, empower staff to make decisions without having to go through the bureaucracy of everything. Anytime somebody wants to do something, they can go online. Maybe it sounds like more of a better computer program to say, hey, can I do this? Type in the address, and it says pop. So, just make it easier. Let's say Doug wants to open an office on Prater Way. He could maybe go to a website, type in an address, and it could pop up hey, this is the zone, here's the tables, this is where it's at.
Right. I don't know that last piece is something that that we've recommended. I mean, it'd be great if we did, if Sparks had that capabilities. But
Yeah.
I think it's more of if you had everything in one document, and you said, okay, Doug wants to build something, and he's in the commercial zoning within the TOD. He can open up the document, go to a land use table, and figure out if it's permitted. If it's not permitted, maybe it's a special use permit. Then he can go to another section under special use permits and see what the process is for a special use permit.
Yeah.
So it's just easier to kind of navigate through all the standards and requirements.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of computer programming and, it's essentially a new website
And not no,
possible.
and what we're talking about is modifications to the existing code. So not necessarily modifications to anything electronically. Your code is provided online, but you can download the code. But we're saying basically make some streamlined changes to the hard copy code that make it easier to read and easier to interpret.
Mr. Chairman, Angela, that was really a good presentation.
Thanks.
It really was. And there are some ideas that were thrown out there. One was the special use permit. I mean, right now it's a year, and I don't know how many of them come in front of us for an extension. Yeah. Improve the codes format. I think that's very essential. And the classification system. I mean, it seems like we just keep adding all the time. Like you mentioned, the city's policy on the industrial area.
Mm-hmm.
The frontage, the parking. I don't know how many applicants have come in here, and there's always an issue about parking. So if we could kind of streamline that would be perfect. And then the consolidation of the codes and Title 20 and 17 and all that. I mean, whenever I'm trying to do some research, I'm all over.
Right.
So, and new review standards. I mean, I think all of them are excellent ideas, and I don't know where it's going to go from here to the city council, but I think we're on the right track.
Good.
Yeah.
Some of the specifics I don't like, but
Okay.
And obviously work through that. I'd like to know maybe what does staff think of this whole idea? Jim, what do you feel of what we're talking here?
Well, I'll speak a little candidly because we're almost in a workshop format at
Good.
this point. With we intentionally hired CFA and Clarion to come at us with brand new ideas. Mm-hmm. And I think some human nature came in when I first read about it. I said, well, I don't want to do that. Tim said,
Right.
I don't want to do that. And then we all kind of talked, and we thought, well, maybe that's just, like I said, human nature where
Change.
you find, the change thing, and you're like, oh, I'm not comfortable doing that. And so there are some things that the direction is to try to find some ways to make things better, and so that's going to require some changes to what we do now. And so we think there's some good suggestions in there. I'm not on board with every suggestion that was proposed today, but that's why I wanted to show the separation of this as a proposal to the Planning Commission from the outside consultants. It's a presentation to staff, and it'll be a presentation to the City Council on Monday as well. And from that, we're hoping that you give the consultant, give us direction. The consultant's contract won't extend much further than Monday on the council presentation. But yes, there's some good suggestions in there. And
Right.
One of the things, Jim, that you sort of alluded to, and I think it's very important, but I also think that the Planning Commission ought to be involved in the step between the staff and the City Council. And that is, I've always felt like that the staff was hemmed in by rules and regulations that they sort of felt obliged and required to live by, and weren't given much flexibility many times. I think I've had several instances of projects that came in where the recommendation was to not approve a project, and I always sort of felt, or not always, many times I felt that the staff member that was making that recommendation, in their heart of hearts, said, "Geez, this is a good project. I wish we could do it, but we can't because of the various regulations that we live within." So I would be in favor of finding a way to give, whether it's these 10% reductions or whatever it might be, give staff more authority to make changes, to make things happen with and live around the regulations. If it's a project that we all want to try to make happen, if it's a good project. But I also don't think that staff ought to be making those decisions and bypassing the Planning Commission as the second step in that. But I do think staff ought to have more flexibility, and which means that the onus is on them sometimes to make decisions as opposed to just reciting the regulations.
Yeah, it's a suggestion that we know how it could create a streamline that we kept getting thrown out there, a streamlined process. Doug gets nervous about that kind of stuff because one planner says, well, I like this, and the other planner says this. So these are good suggestions that will require the efforts of all the local planners. I'll be bringing them in. If we move forward, talking to planning commissioners, coming up with concepts of how do we do this? How do we protect the planner? That's me. You got to be careful that we're implementing policy and not setting policy, and those are the fine lines of what the government's role is, and not the elected's role of creating policy and that kind of thing. And so this is quite the project, quite the opportunity to really analyze maybe a new way of going about zoning and development standards that we have here in Sparks. Some good examples that Angela proposed was the use table. I think that if you look in, somebody calls and says, I'm zoned PO. What are my professional office? What can I do there? Well, we go to chapter 20.80, flip that big book open and go, okay, here, and we read that list. In a use table, like the TOD has, whether you're in the employment district, the mixed-use commercial district, the residential neighborhood, any of those districts, you can go to any table in any of those districts and you can see them all listed, and you know whether or not you can do that use there. That's convenient. That's more efficient. So those are good examples. We have it all the time where someone comes in and says, well, I'd like to do, I'm going to say an internet cafe or something. What on earth do we put that in a code from 1976? Office, retail, restaurant, drive-through business? And those are where we think their suggestion of the use categories might help us fit something in, instead of saying, okay, well, we think that's a good use, like you said, Commissioner Vols, and go to the City Council, can you sponsor a code amendment so we can add internet cafe as a permitted use? And that takes the applicant time.
No, and I like, the concept is great, and I think I love it as a general. The thing is, I want to be so concerned, like you were hitting my point saying, well, we don't always need the geo report, we don't always need the hydrology. I can tell you horrible stories, and I think staff can, of ones before they required in this area, that projects that never should have been improved. So, and so what I want to make sure is we don't just, out of doing it a good new way, we don't lose thought of some of the, why it bothers you probably, Jim.
Safeguards,
Yes,
Right.
there are reasons for some of these safeguards, so we need to make sure there's a balance of that as we're changing these.
Right, and
is
I
what
think it goes back to that one size does not fit all.
Right.
Right? And so
Exactly.
staff, for the most part, has been great about saying, well, maybe we don't need to require this, or maybe we
Right.
don't need to require this, but that's not always the case.
It's not always the case.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we keep that in mind.
Yep.
I love the ideas, but let's be careful.
Right.
Good points. Anything else? Yes.
A couple of points that were made in the presentation by Angela that I wanted to direct your attention on and solicit some
Sure.
Input and discussion about. One was had to go back to the issue of auto-oriented uses in the TOD in particular. And I think actually when she looked at me, or maybe at any rate, I think what was noted at that point was really incorrect. And I think that the thought is we have policy, long-standing policy going back, I think, to at least the 1980s, where, and going back to when we had a lot of tourist commercial zoning in the area in and around downtown, particularly along the Victorian Avenue and Prater quarters, of essentially, over time, transitioning those quarters from the auto-oriented uses that existed along those quarters to tourist commercial types of uses, because again, this predates TOD by quite some time.
Right.
When the thought was that really would be, you'd have casinos and you'd have entertainment and dining and shopping and all of those things, and so a lot of the zoning along those quarters does not permit, for example, auto repair shops. It does not permit the other broad
Car sales.
categories,
Auto
car
sales.
sales. Well, not just car sales, but vehicle sales in general.
Right.
So it could be a motorcycle dealership or a car, whatever. So those uses became essentially non-conforming uses, and the idea was that over time, as the area redeveloped, if you will, those uses would be phased out. And so that explains why, for example, with the old Lithia dealership site, which is very close to Victorian Square, that's become a non-conforming use, and you essentially can't have an auto dealership go back onto that property. So one of the questions that we wanted to have a policy discussion about with both the Planning Commission and the City Council was whether that policy, that longstanding policy, still makes sense or not, because in a sense it was just like the TOD standards. It was aspirational. It was it foresaw a future where there would be if you will, higher and better uses for those properties than the auto-oriented uses, and maybe that's not the case anymore. On the other hand, if we allow, if we change the policy, if you will, and we change the zoning accordingly, then those uses can revert to or maintain auto-oriented uses. Then of course you probably delay or defer, indefinitely, the redevelopment of some of those properties. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that one in particular. The other one had to do with the industrial area, and one of the underlying fundamental policies in the industrial code update was that the industrial area should remain essentially industrial and be an area where you have those sorts of uses that generate those sorts of employment. It's not well suited in many cases for the sorts of commercial uses, although in that same update we allowed for commercial uses if they meet certain location criteria. basically primarily along the arterials. So, and that constrains certain other types of uses from being able to go into the industrial area. Again, another policy question. Is that the policy that we want to maintain as a general policy? And then if not, if we want to make a change, if we want to revisit that, then what would follow is you would change your zoning code to allow for other uses and maybe prohibit certain uses. So
The Planning Commission may remember some of the veterans, I'll call you. We had, prior to the industrial zoning code update, we had the ability to do recreational facilities anywhere in the industrial with special use permit. And I think we ended up having like a cheer gym going in between 3 freight terminals that had the triple trailers, and then they went next to a gun range. And the Planning Commission said, are these the appropriate uses for, where was it, down on Spice Islands or something, in the deeper areas of the industrial area? Of course, to citizens, they're less expensive price per square foot, so they're attractive. But that's why you have zoning. Was it appropriate? And in the 2008 update to the industrial code, the Planning Commission said that it wasn't. But those are things we want you to reconsider. If recreational uses, like Angela was saying, should those be opened back up? Where are we going in the industrial area?
And so in terms of both of those policies, again, a lot of times the recommendation from staff, if you have a use that doesn't fit with the policy, basically the code says you must say no. Now, if you want, if there's a desire to allow more, a greater variety of uses, to allow some of those automobile-oriented uses to be reestablished, if you will, then ultimately we need to change our policy. But I'm not suggesting to you that the existing policy is the wrong policy, but I am suggesting to you that because it comes up so often, it merits some discussion.
Anyone have any thoughts on the issue? It seems to me those are almost too deep of a question to sort of throw out at the end of the meeting and have us give you our feelings on it. A topic that would include 2 or 3 of those kinds of items, or 4, would be very appropriate to have a workshop on, it seems to me, and give us some facts and get our opinion on it. The points you made in terms of staff, I would like, and I understand the legal issues associated with this, but I would like to be able to give staff more flexibility. But on the other hand, I don't know tonight whether that I would say, let's change the everything we've been doing in terms of the regulations and the rules that we've been living by.
Well, certainly the issue of or the idea of revisiting the auto-oriented uses along the Prater and Victorian corridors. I mean, for the most part, those are encompassed within the TOD corridor. So, to the extent that we're going to have a discussion about the TOD, we can probably have some discussion along about that question, if you will. As part of that discussion, even though it will be more focused on the employment district. But yeah, that's sort of a long, that's as we move forward. And just let me give you a little more background and refresh your memories. The direction that staff has gotten from City Council in terms of looking at removing barriers, if you will, and impediments to job creation and development was to sort of proceed on a 3 tracks. One was some very quick amendments that we have, for the most part, brought forward. For example, when Tim brought to you the ability to, or the extension of the period of time when the use leaves that was permitted by a special use permit, before that special use permit essentially, or the use becomes null and void. That was one of those quick things that we did in those first few months after receiving that direction from City Council. This effort, the hiring an outside consultant to review our code, this is sort of the second track. And the third track, if you will, is really the sort of comprehensive overhaul of our development ordinances, related ordinances, which are a lot of the things that really would be addressed through the mid and long-term look that CFA and Clarion has suggested. So some of these policy questions really will, the big ones like that, we will address, in the mid to the long term. But I wanted to get that out now so that, it's, because it is fundamentally one of the reasons we can't bring forward recommendations of approval for certain types of uses in the TOD if they're auto dealerships or repair shops, for example, is because we have that underlying policy, and it's been there for decades now. So at some point, if there's a desire to change it, then we need to have that discussion, and it needs to be translated into policy and eventually into code.
The biggest problem with that, it lends us to creating our own blighted situation, if you will. Lithia dealership has been empty now for, 3 years, maybe longer? And no one wants to touch it because they can't go in there with a project that they want to go in there with because it's, doesn't fit. So, therein lies what we're saying. The problem is trying to come up with a way to solve that, and how much flexibility do you give staff to maybe revert back to that old use? Do we make them show that there's a need? Can they show that there's a need for a dealership there again? Who knows?
Well, and to some extent, I see it less of being a question about giving staff flexibility, because at the end of the day, you would put it into your codes, and so there would be either flexibility or there wouldn't be. But it's really the broader question is are we willing to change our vision for what those quarters are to be or could be, because to the extent that if you change our policy and therefore our codes to say, okay, we're going to allow a use that had become non-conforming and you have, and that parcel can't be that use anymore. Okay, if we say, all right, we're going to let the Lithia dealership be a car dealership again, that's fine, but then there's an opportunity cost, if you will, because then it can't be something else, that maybe was what the vision was underlying the policy. So that's really, it really goes back to what's the plan, what's the vision for these quarters, because that's what those policies reflect. And the same thing, you could say about the industrial area. If you want that to be an area that is an industrial area with lots of manufacturing and distribution uses, and we want that to be the place for that, then the current policy that we have in place and the current and the code as it currently exists is the appropriate code, if you will. If we want to say, well, that means having to say no sometimes, and we don't want to have to say no, then we could allow more uses to go into that area, but then that may undermine the appeal of the area for industrial users, because now all of a sudden they have to deal with retail uses or recreational uses and the potential conflicts that come with having those sorts of uses in close proximity to an industrial use. So what do we want? Again, it does go back to vision and what we want the plan to be for those areas. There's always compromise, right? And to some extent, it's the same thing with the issue that we're having with the TOD is, with the TO standards sort of aspire to reflect an aspiration that these areas will become mixed use and will become less auto dependent and will become denser and in some respects more vibrant. And if you're going to achieve that vision, ideally you need to be you're going to have to say no to certain things. But if we don't want to say no, then you have to relax those standards, if you will, and then that compromises the vision. So that's really what some of these fundamental questions are about.
Maybe you could add in something like, in like your corridors, have a certain percentage of that, certain zoning, you know, like 8% or 10% or whatever, to where like Lithia, you know, take what area that is and say, you know, in that whole area, that whole district there, a certain percentage, we'll put in whatever we want and never go over that percentage, you know.
And you know, that may be, I mean, there may be, there are probably, and I'm sure there are ways to try to deal with that, but I think part of it goes back fundamentally to what do we want for these zoning districts?
It's a long-term vision is what we're looking at.
One of the, going back to the stakeholder meetings, just a side note to an extent, the TOD has taken a beating for a lot of policy questions that were set with the creation of the redevelopment plan in like 1976 or whenever it was. Like Armando said, the auto-oriented uses along B Street, now Victorian, that was a policy decision of a city council from quite a while ago, and folks come in now and they're blaming it on the TOD. And so the TOD has taken a beating when it had nothing to do with some policy that was set a long time ago. When we created the TOD, I'm not defending the TOD, just like I said, just a side note, when we created the TOD, we included a lot of the tourist commercial uses that were already there. We kind of just put them into the use table and upped the density requirements and some of the setbacks, but the uses didn't change that much.
And the reality is that I think both Sparks and Reno have come to the conclusion that, you know, some of those things as aspirational, I think is the word I want to use, that they are inappropriate at some point given realities that we live in. And maybe that's the same issue that we have to deal with, you know, are some of the things that we thought were grand ideas 20 years ago just not workable in today's world. But again, I'm not sure that's a subject that we kind of deal with here, but it's, in fact, I know we can't deal with it here, and it's probably not even a planning commission, it's definitely not a planning commission decision, it's probably ultimately a city council decision, but it's something that we ought to be thinking about to try to make it easier for staff to do their job.
Well, you know, fundamentally, I mean, I think the Planning Commission very much has a role in these sorts of issues because the NRS ascribes you know, a particular role for the Planning Commission in terms of the development of the master plan, and you know, certainly the City Council is the last word. But you know, it is something. It is within the realm of responsibility of the Planning Commission.
It seems to me that I would be willing to, you know, take on a couple of these topics in a workshop format where we, you know, set aside a couple of hours and have staff present some options and, you know, discuss it, and at least as opposed to kind of coming at it off the top of our head like we're doing now.
No, and what I was trying to do was really, I mean, I was looking for some feedback, a little bit of feedback tonight, but really what they're highlighting in their presentation, in their recommendations, is that it's a question that needs to be addressed or should be addressed because again, it underlies, you know, very fundamental aspects of our zoning code.
Without the certain policy direction, we can't come up with scenarios. It's too broad. We kind of have to, selfishly, I guess, we would like some confines of, yeah, we think it's a good idea. No way. Okay. Now we can go from there.
You know, I want to say something. You know, I sit here every time and we're voting on a project on the TODs and we're saying, geez, we can't meet this. But we really do want TODs, or I do. I think there's a real reason for TODs. We just need to develop it better. We need to look at how the times are. Let's face it, we've gone through horrible economies for a while. Long term, that won't be forever. There is a reason for TODs, and I don't want to just throw it away. And I get worried sometimes because we, you know, say, yeah, I just don't like this portion of that we're ready to throw it away. I'm not ready to throw it away, and I think most people feel that same way. We need to be very careful. There are areas that should be. I've been listening to you over the last year. There are areas, a piece of land that we should be doing this. The automobile won't be forever. We do need to look at this thing, and we need to. So that's where we need that. So we can't don't just throw it away because just that comment.
Okay. Any other comments?
I still say sometimes it's okay to say no, too, if it just doesn't work, and we can't lose track of our long-term vision either.
No, good point. Anyone else?
Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation tonight.
Very good.
Appreciate it.
Hope we gave you what you were looking for.
Probably not.
Probably not.
No comment.
I mean, I think, again, I want to emphasize that, really what they've done is they had the stakeholder meetings, which in a sense were sort of, in my view, I mean, the analogy I would use, or the metaphor I would use, is they were sort of signposts of places to look for problems, in particular, in terms of the review of their code. Go look at our code. These things, these concerns were expressed. They point to areas of the code where maybe we need to take a particularly hard look. They went and looked at them. They have a series of recommendations, and that really just starts the process of, okay, what are we going to do next, right? So some of these things will translate into code amendments, perhaps, that we will as staff take on, in the next immediate, 6 months to a year. Some of it will have to be really best addressed in the mid to long-term framework by a more comprehensive overhaul of the zoning code. And in the budget that the City Council approved is for fiscal 12-13, there was an allocation of funds for the more comprehensive zoning code overhaul. So that's when some of those issues would be ideally addressed.
Right.
One most important thing is we don't want to make Doug nervous. And
We're staying on.
No, we don't care about you.
yeah, it's him.
That's good.
All right, let's move on to item number 11, public comment. Anyone in the public would like to make a comment at this point? Seeing none. Any comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
To adjourn.
We are adjourned. Unanimous vote.